Speaking after Professor Nick Benedell is a bit of a hospital pass. But I'll try and keep you entertained. Thanks very much for the privilege of addressing you today. I'm very passionate about supply chain and operations planning as a key discipline in unlocking profitability for Nampak and its shareholders, and I think we've got a long way to travel as an organization and frankly as a country. So, Professor Benedell spoke about the great opportunity in Africa. I'm going to unpack that a bit more, if you'll pardon the pun, and talk to you about packaging in Africa and what the real opportunity is for us to do business in Africa on the back of a burgeoning consumer class. So first, a couple of words about Nampak. We are the biggest packaging company in Africa. We do a very wide range of different products in a number of countries across the continent. We're also, by the way, as an interesting bit of trivia, the largest producer of milk bottles in the United Kingdom, which is a bit of a legacy business for us, as bottled water on the supermarket shelf is now more expensive than the equivalent volume of milk, just to give you an indication of how the world is changing in terms of consumer preferences. But never mind the UK, let's move on to Africa. We truly are a very passionate African company. We have been active in Africa for 25, 30 years. We are steeped in doing business in Africa. We've got, I think, a deep-seated expertise about what it takes to be successful in Africa. And as you can see, we are present in a number of countries where we produce a wide range of different products across the major substrates, aluminium, tin plate, paper, plastics, and really our growth is premised on the opportunity that we see in the rest of Africa. And you can see there that the two countries right at the top there, Nigeria and Ethiopia, they, in our view, represent the pinnacle of investment opportunities, in spite of the fact that they are experiencing some significant microeconomic challenges at this point in time. So the Nampak strategy, very simply, is to, first of all, protect, nurture, and grow our existing businesses. I believe that what you very often witness in South Africa is that people extract the maximum value from existing assets and do not spend enough money and human capital on being competitive on an international basis. So part of the strategy that Nampak is introducing at the moment, following at the moment, is to recapitalize its business and to take out equipment that in some instances is up to 60 years old. So this is kit that really should be designated to an industrial museum, which we're now replacing with the latest state-of-the-art technology, robotized, fully computerized, automated, and it's a quantum leap for us to move into a world of touchscreens with the associated skills challenges that brings with it. Working capital management, inventory. I think I'm speaking to a fairly friendly audience here. So inventory is the root of all evil as far as I'm concerned. If you can manage down your inventory, you expose fundamental inefficiencies in your business. So this is a key focus area for us. And then simply the basics of running a manufacturing organization. If you buy better, and if you make better, and if you sell better, you have to be a more profitable organization. If you neglect those disciplines, eventually, in spite of whatever these knowledgeable pessimists, these accountants can come up with to massage your numbers, gravity will reach up a hand and pull you back down if your basics are not in place. But then the exciting bit, and that is that we want to accelerate our growth into Africa. It's challenging, it's tough. The old saying that Africa is not for sissies, I can attest to that. And I've been known to hand out t-shirts to some of our expats who go in there. being an expat in Africa, living in the middle of Nigeria in a town called Akbara or in a city called Ibadan, it's really, really challenging. It's really tough, and it takes a special kind of person and a special kind of skill to work there. But the fortunate thing is that we are able to coattail on the growth strategies of our major customers. As the SAB Millers, the Heinekens, the British American Tobacco Corporation, the Coca-Colas, as they expand and grow across Africa, they need packaging. They need a way to take their product to market. And that is the game that we're in, and that is the opportunity that we have identified. And we are very excited to be a part of that growth story. So, if you look at our operations, we have, following a period of some significant refocusing of our asset base in South Africa, we've reduced our manufacturing footprint from some 56 plants to 28, and we now have 15 plants in the rest of Africa. We think we know how to do business, and I have to stress there's this urban myth that in order to do business in Africa, you have to, quote unquote, play the game. You have to participate in corruption. You have to slide the brown envelope under the table if you want to be successful in Africa. And I can tell you that is not true. And in fact, it is probably one of the most counterproductive things that you can do in Africa. Because bribery is a bit like a drug. And once the person on the other side of the table is corrupted and is hooked on that payment that he gets on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis, you as the corruptor, because that is what you are on the hook for the rest of time. And that will obviously depress your returns. So we've taken a very principled stand on this issue, and we believe that it's possible to go into countries where it's really tough, do business without paying bribes, and it takes longer, and it takes some significant resistance in sometimes, and sometimes you get the bureaucrat who will deliberately delay his decision while expecting some sort of consideration. But if you stick to your guns, at the end of the day, you and he will both win. Again, the issue that I think many people consider when they think of Africa is one of risk, and they feel that it's impossible to do business in Africa because of these enormous risks that you face. So if you look at political and country risk, doing risk in a place like Nigeria is challenging. However, if you look at the stability with which the new incumbent president took over from his predecessor, this was the first time in something like 3 decades that there has been a peaceful transition of power in Nigeria, very positive development, a lot of stability in the rest of Africa, even though you find that the conventional notions of Western democracy may not necessarily apply, it is still quite possible to be successful. Now, one of the risks that you find from doing business in these countries is one of regulatory risk. And it reminds me of a saying that I heard once from the chief executive of Chevron. And he said that the place in the world where he faces the highest political risk is in the state of California. And I'm starting to feel a little bit like him when I think about the regulatory risk that we face in South Africa versus the regulatory risk that we face in the rest of Africa. We are a fairly lightly regulated industry. We're not a particularly sexy industry. So we're not telecoms, we are not energy, we're not oil refining, so therefore we tend to attract less regulation than those high margin, high profile, politically sensitive investments. But in South Africa, I fear that there is a tendency for government to over-regulate industry. And the regulations are not always value-adding. On the contrary, they make it quite difficult for us to compete. And this is something that I think we as a country need to address and become more flexible if we want to grow the economy and create more jobs that we so desperately need. Monetary risk, fiscal risk is a big issue in Africa. We are, at this point in time, exposed to that particular risk as a result of liquidity challenges that we experience in Nigeria and Angola as a result of the low oil price. Remember that when oil was at $110 a barrel, no one in his right mind contemplated a world where oil could go down to $27 a barrel at the end of January of this year. Since then, of course, oil has come back quite handsomely. It's now up 80%, over $50 a barrel. So one would anticipate that these liquidity challenges will work themselves out of the system in time. Now, one of the fortunate things is that we essentially bill our multinational customers in US dollars. So while we invoice in the local currency, we will be able to link that to the prior month's average prevailing exchange rate to the US dollar. So effectively, we are able to invoice in US dollars, and that gives us a huge advantage in order to mitigate against sudden and significant fluctuations in exchange rates. If you think about raw materials, it's a big issue. Many of our raw materials are imported, and again, there's a perception that ports in Africa are enormously inefficient. I can tell you just that in the short time that I've been with Nampak, we have seen waiting times in the port of Luanda in Angola go down from 3 months, sometimes 4 months, to less than 30 days as a result of investments that they've made in infrastructure. Now, this allows you to run with lower inventories, it allows you to run with a leaner supply chain, and of course take money out of your investments. That is very important to unlock responsiveness also to your customers in those countries. But we still have to truck in all of the water that we consume in Angola. There is no access to water distribution infrastructure of any sort. We have to truck in some 20,000 liters of diesel every day. So it's a big volume of diesel because we have to generate our own electricity. The main electricity grid runs within line of sight of our plant, but for a variety of reasons we have been unable to connect to that particular line. So there is a reason why margins in Africa are significantly higher. It is because the risks and the costs of doing business are significantly higher as well. Further risk is one of payment. Somebody will run away with your money at some stage and not pay you. And that is, again, where your customer portfolio and your customer relationships are incredibly important to give you the opportunity to recover the funds that you invest. But fundamentally, it boils down to relationships. If you're a good corporate citizen, if you are a player in a country that respects the way of doing business, that respects the people that you employ, then you have a fighting chance of being successful. Very often the narrative of South African business moving into the rest of Africa is that South Africans are experienced as arrogant, as condescending, as patronizing. And I think there is a large degree of truth in that. I think it's very important that as one moves into Africa, that one is very mindful and respectful of local customs and local sensitivities. So Africa has been a success story for us. You can see there that we are on track to deliver in the 2016 financial year R1 billion in operating profit from the rest of Africa. And we've built that through a series of acquisitions, greenfield investments. And when I say greenfield investments in Africa, they truly are greenfield. You have to hack your way, in some instances, through some pretty overgrown jungle to establish your facility. This is true pioneering stuff, which is which is interesting, and it gives you a real sense of accomplishment when you achieve something. Without the rest of Africa growth story, Nampak would be condemned to grow at South African GDP growth rates. And as you saw during the course of last week, it was reported that South African GDP in fact shrunk 1.2%. And I think we're in for some further tough times in South Africa going forward, just judging by manufacturing activity that we see around us. So in order to mitigate and to compensate against the economic risk of doing business in South Africa, one has to diversify. One has to have an opportunity to pursue growth, and the rest of Africa presents that growth opportunity in spades. And there you can see some of the numbers. Trading profit up 43%. Now, even after adjusting for exchange rate volatility, and we did in the half-year results that we recently announced, report that we suffered an exchange rate loss of 114 million rand in Angola. Now that's painful. But even after adjusting for that loss, the margin that we make in the rest of Africa is 1.5 times greater than the margin that we make in South Africa. So in South Africa, we're able to command a trading margin of 8.5%, which is not exactly something to write home about. But in the rest of Africa, we, after exchange rate impacts, make margins in excess of 12.5%. And that tells you something about the first mover advantage and the opportunity that awaits those who are prepared to venture into Africa. And in fact, such is the contribution that Africa is now half of Nampak's group trading profit. And we believe that there's a longer-term story. Yes, it's tough at the moment. Yes, there are issues at the moment. And the Africa story seems to have gone off the boil a bit. 3-4 years ago, everybody was writing reports. McKinsey wrote a famous report about the lions in Africa, and Africa was flavor of the month. Now, the short-term investor is very fickle, and they go away very quickly when they see any sort of risk emerging. So Africa at the moment is not the most attractive and sought-after investment destination. But if you look at the longer-term demographics, we absolutely believe that there are further opportunities that await us. And that is supported by the growth that we are seeing. So if we look at the African opportunity, and let's look at some of the demographics, and a very similar story to what Professor Benadel showed earlier, is that more and more people are becoming working age. The average age in sub-Saharan Africa is 18 years old. Compare that with mature, developed economies like Western Europe. If you compare it to Japan, for example, where they have a demographic time bomb of people who are no longer consuming because they are reaching the end of their working life and are becoming more and more conservative, which contributes to this deflationary spiral that these developed economies find themselves in. And these people, as they reach working age, which is very important for us, they also reach drinking age, which means that they become consumers of beer. And beer is a big story for us. And the African love for beer is something that we're very excited about. And I hear some giggles from the audience. I guess some of you may still be suffering the after effects of some beer consumption of last night, but that's good because you consumed a lot of packaging in the process. I'm very happy that you were happy. As people make these steps into transitioning from a subsistence economics to an economics where they are able to become first-time consumers of packaged goods, fast-moving consumer goods, the demand that they have for an aspirational consumption pattern They want to be seen by their friends with a mobile phone, first of all. That is the most important status symbol across Africa. But then a close second to that is a shiny can of beer. And that is the story that we are pegging our strategy on. So the youth in Africa is very important. And why? First of all, young people tend to be more optimistic. I guess it's because they haven't had the opportunity to become cynical as they grow older. But they are more optimistic about the future, and they believe that there are opportunities for them to become wealthier. They are prepared to take more risks, and these are people that form the core of the African consumer market. They're very brand conscious. They're very conscious of what they wear, what they eat, what they drink, what they smoke, what they use, what that says about them. So they're very susceptible to branding. But let's not forget that Africa, south of the Sahara, with some exceptions, still is a desperately poor place. There is an enormous amount of poverty, as you will recall from the map that you saw earlier. And it's tough. Some people have gone into Africa, paid a lot of money, and lost a lot of money. Some people recently have announced that they are pulling back out of some African countries that we believe hold great promise for us. So Tiger Brands, for example, announced that they are going to move out of Ethiopia. And of course, those are business decisions that they need to make based on the facts that they have at their disposal, which are not the same that we are looking at. But we believe that in order to be successful as an organization, we need to be present in Africa, and we need to grow with the African continent. So this is how beer is typically consumed in Africa. Right now, you talk about direct access to market, and you talk about short supply chains, and you talk about inventory management. It doesn't get much better than that. Now, these beers are actually quite interesting, because what they do to sort of zip up the taste of it is crocodile bile is a frequent ingredient that gets thrown into this, and it gives a nice bite to it. So I'm told. I also am told that it makes it quite poisonous. So you may remember some tragic incidents where a group of people in Mozambique died as a result of the addition of some crocodile bile to their home brew. And of course, that also gives an opportunity for packaged goods, because people say, I don't want to take the risk of this unknown substance that I'm sucking on. I want to have the confidence that I'm able to have a branded product that also represents safety. What they also add to this, particularly in Nigeria, are car batteries. So they will dump a whole car battery into this, and apparently the acid and the lead together gives a quite interesting sensation when you drink it. Again, I'm very engaged with Africa, as you can tell, but I draw the line at living the African experience. Not always so healthy for you. So 50 to 70% of all alcohol consumed in Africa is still brewed at home, and they come with all of these very interesting side effects. So there's a huge dormant market lying there for the beverage companies to tap into. Sorghum beer is really entry-level beer, typically sold in a carton, these days also in a PET bottle, and this is almost as a nutritional substitute that this is consumed. It's a very healthy drink, as a matter of fact. Again, very popular in the southern African countries, in particular in Zambia, hugely popular. Then you get to the first mainstream level of beer consumption, which is the value beer. And you can see there that the beer has now changed from opaque beer, which is stuff you can't see through, to clear beer, which if you hold it up to the light, you can actually see what you're drinking and also see what's been left in the packaging for you to consume. And that's 5 to 10% mainstream beer, and then the premium beers and the super premium beers. So a very pyramid-like market structure where there's a huge opportunity at the bottom end of the market as people become wealthier to consume more and more beer. But it's very difficult for the average African to afford a beer. If you look at how many hours the average worker needs to work to afford one serving of beer, 1 liter of beer, in Ethiopia, 16.6 hours of work before he can buy 1 beer. In the US, the equivalent statistics suggest that the US factory worker will require about 5 minutes to afford a liter of beer, which just goes to show the disparity between different economies. And this puts a constraint on your opportunity to grow, because if you have to work for 2 days to afford 1 beer, you're pretty parsimonious in how you consume that beer. But it's a story of large numbers. If you multiply a small number by a very large number, you have an answer which is still pretty large. And if you look at a place like Ethiopia, 110 million people, GDP growth rate 8 to 10%, in spite of some very serious climatic challenges that they've got stacked against them. If you look at Nigeria, huge population, very energetic, active, entrepreneurial, and keen to be associated with Western consumer goods. And then Angola, which is pretty much, particularly in the urban areas, a middle-class country. If you go into Luanda and you look at the development taking place there, of course it has now slowed down significantly as a result of the low oil price. Modern buildings, huge investments in infrastructure, a country that is clearly on the move and developing very fast. And those are the opportunities that we have targeted. Kenya is another market that is very exciting. It is beset by some of its own troubles, not dissimilar to our own, but it is nevertheless a market that we are very interested in. So there we go, Nigeria, 180 million people, 46% urbanization rate, and that's an astonishing number. For a country as poor as Nigeria to have so many urbanized people is an astonishing number. Of course, they are not living in ideal circumstances, but this urbanization rate is increasing at 5% per annum, which is huge. So there is a flood of people moving into the cities. And of course, as you move into the cities, you are no longer able to rely on opportunities to use your own sorghum or your own grain to brew your own beer, and hence the consumption goes up of packaged beer. So 89% of beer is still illicit, which is a staggering number, but 10% volume growth. And if you think about the largest corporate merger, I guess, in South African history, which is the takeover of SAB Miller by AB InBev, why did AB InBev buy SAB Miller? We've got a view, and our view is that there's only one answer, and that is Africa. They bought SAB Miller because the only growing beer market in the world where you're able to achieve double-digit growth rates is in the rest of Africa. And if I speak about beer and beverages, obviously I focus on a very narrow segment of the economy. So as you sit here and you think about your own industry, extrapolate and think what it means for your industry across a much broader spectrum. If you look at Ethiopia, again, huge urbanization rate. It is a very poor country, but with a very, very rich culture. I've been there a number of times, and Ethiopian people are incredibly proud of their rich and ancient culture that goes back many thousands of years. Part of the challenge that many of these African countries face is that they have for so long been so reliant on primary commodities as their way to generate wealth for their economies that there is virtually no manufacturing footprint. Not nearly the same manufacturing footprint that we see, for example, in South Africa. So we have a big opportunity as first movers to go in there and build a manufacturing footprint which meets international standards. I think this is very important, that one doesn't try and develop somehow a substandard approach to manufacturing in the rest of Africa. It's got to be up to scratch. But the opportunity in Ethiopia is so large. It is a market where you've seen compound growth rates in beer consumption of 10-12% per annum sustained now for 4 to 5 years, where a company like Heineken, first of all, they bought 2 breweries, and then they built a third one, and before the third one was fully commissioned, they were already planning a 4th brewery because they anticipated that they would be out of capacity almost as soon as the 3rd brewery was commissioned. So very exciting stuff for manufacturing in those countries, and of course the packaging opportunity is significant. Now, glass is the major medium in which to sell beer, and it's typically a returnable glass market, which is, I guess, more environmentally friendlier than a one-way market, but it does come with some challenges because some of these returnable bottles you may have seen have been recycled over and over again, so they become quite dirty and scuffed, and by the 27th time that it goes round, you can hardly see what's in there. So there is again an opportunity to make possible first world high standard packaging. And this is what our customers need and require because they've invested billions in their brands. And they're quite adamant that an SAB Miller beer in South Africa is as important as it is in Italy, or as it is in the US, or as it is in Lagos. So they are passionate about protecting and projecting their brands to make sure that consumers are able to associate with that. So there's no notion of lowering standards because you're operating in the rest of Africa. Now, South Africa dominates in terms of glass production. It is still far and away the biggest glass market south of the Sahara. But Nigeria catching up rapidly, Angola, huge opportunity, and then a smattering of other markets. And in particular, we are looking at opportunities in Nigeria and Ethiopia, where we are looking at 2 greenfields opportunities, totaling investment of some $160, $170 million that we intend to invest in those countries once the macroeconomic situation has calmed down a bit. But as they say in the TV ads, wait, there's more. And this is a notion that I think requires some regulatory cooperation, and that is the setting up of agro-processing centers. Africa has the potential, and it's a truism, to be the breadbasket of the rest of the world. And the Chinese have figured this out. You will see Chinese agriculture going into the rest of Africa in spades. They are omnipresent. In fact, in Luanda, as you drive down the streets, the street signs are now in Mandarin and in Portuguese. And they're there for a reason, because the Chinese have spotted the opportunity and are participating in this in a massive, massive way. But it takes this notion of integrated and cooperative supply chains. Before you can have an agro-processing hub, you need commercial farming. Subsistence farming just doesn't cut it. It doesn't have enough scale to justify it. But then you need proper roads, you need infrastructure to get the product to market. And once you've processed it, and once you've packaged it, you need further infrastructure and distribution facilities to get your product to market. And this is the opportunity, but also the conundrum that we face. And we are exploring some of these concepts with our customers in order to act as a catalyst. Obviously, out of self-interest, we'd like to sell the packaging, but we believe that there's a significant opportunity. Just as an aside, it's very interesting that all the Milo sold in the UK is manufactured in Kenya, which is a bizarre statistic, and one wonders why that happens, but it just goes to show how globalized the world has become. So if I can wrap up and let you go off and have a well-deserved cup of coffee or tea. Africa is, at this point in time, an exceptionally challenging environment. As a result of commodities plummeting, we have seen government revenues go down, and when government revenues go down, either taxes go up or government spending goes down. And if government spending goes down, obviously, it has a huge impact on disposable income in those countries. But we anticipate that these things will recover. The commodity cycle will turn. It will spin its wheels and move along, and we anticipate that there will be an improvement in commodity prices going forward. Again, oil up 80% from January already, which is bad news for us South Africans with our currency where it is at the moment. The margins that you're able to capture more than compensate you for the risk that you carry. If you have the courage of your convictions and you set up an operation in Africa, the rewards are there. The rewards are there in terms of both growth, where you're able to grow at, our beverage can business in Nigeria, for example, is growing at 30% per annum. It's inconceivable that one would be able to find a mature market segment in South Africa that could grow at 30% per annum. It does not happen. In fact, I'm hard-pressed to think of any other commodity that could demonstrate growth rates like that. And on top of these high growth rates, you have this phenomenally high margin. So for our metals business, which is largely comprised of beverage cans and the rest of Africa, we are able to command margins of between 18 and 20%, which is very attractive and very lucrative. So you're well compensated for the risk. And I think it's also important that one has to have a longer term perspective. One has to look at how this demographic revolution is going to play out across the African continent. When, and you'll note I say when and not if, when these young people start to become earners of significant disposable income, when the governments realize that they have to diversify their economies, that they have to invest in infrastructure, that they have to enable a diversified manufacturing sector to develop itself, to get away from this dependence on a single commodity. When that happens, the opportunity afforded by the close to 1 billion emerging consumers in sub-Saharan Africa is enormous, and there is no other market in the world that offers that same opportunity. So we remain bullish on Nigeria, Angola, Zambia and Ethiopia. Those are markets that we believe hold great potential. We believe that governance is improving rapidly. There are markets, of course, where it is still a challenge, but typically governance is improving and getting better all the time. And we believe that we, with our footprint, are uniquely positioned to take advantage of this opportunity. But it's all about being careful, being prudent, and not getting a rush of blood to the head, as some companies have experienced, and investing imprudently and recklessly, and in the process destroying value for shareholders. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention and your participation. We are Afro-optimists. We believe we are here for the long haul, and we believe in the future of this continent, and more importantly, we believe in the future of its people. Thank you very much.